All right, everybody, welcome back. We have a bit of a different format for you today. If you are listening to this on the podcast format, this is available also in video. So go over to YouTube right now. Unless you're driving, don't do that. If you're driving, keep listening. You're doing great. But if you're somewhere where you can maybe pull up a video and see our faces, then do so. We would love for you to see us. That kind of sounds conceited, doesn't it? Well, I hope you can check that out too. And while you're there, look at all of our other videos, because we've got a lot of fun stuff up right now. So, hello Dante, what's up?
Hello Joseph.
You doing good?
Really good. If you are watching this on YouTube, you get to see this new look.
Yeah.
If you're not, well then, you have no idea what I'm talking about.
You have no idea. We're not gonna say what the new look is. So
Yeah.
go to the YouTube and see later. So today we're gonna have a bit of an kind of out there conversation. We've got a lot of different concepts kind of floating around in our brain. We had a coffee class recently where I threw out this concept that I've been learning from a book that I've been reading, and we're gonna talk about that a little bit later. And Dante had some thoughts on that as well. But before we do that, let's go into what you're drinking. All right, Dante, so you brewed us this lovely Sumatra for us. What are we thinking this is tasting like right now?
You know what? It kind of tastes like wood, but like in a more of like a smell type of way. It's very smoky. That's what I'm saying.
So, do you think the smokiness is like from roast development, or do you think it's from just what the coffee tastes like in general?
Honestly, I think it's from the brew method.
I calibrated it and cleaned my grinder today. Went a little bit too fine for this. And the brew time on the Calito was like 6 minutes. So I think that kind of extended extraction.
Oh, okay.
I also think this coffee really needs formulated water. We just use filtered water for it, and I think it could really benefit from formulation.
That'd be weird too. It tastes cooked is what I'm saying.
You heard it. Yeah. Hey, one of the tasting notes is pumpkin pie, so it just tastes like cooked pumpkin pie.
Tastes like cooked pumpkin pie. Now that you mentioned it, it does have a very like pumpkin flavoring to it.
It does, like canned pumpkin. Like not like fresh pumpkin, but canned pumpkin specifically. All right, well that's what you're drinking. Let's get on to the main topic of today's show. So we are gonna base the conversation off of something that I threw out in a coffee class that we had. If you were there, thanks so much for hanging out with us in person. We've got some more things coming up on that, and really looking forward to doing more workshops with the AeroPress. That's what the brew method we were using. A lot of people I think really enjoyed it and got a lot out of it. So if you are curious about those kind of classes, be sure to follow us on Instagram, because that's where we post about all those sort of events that are upcoming. Concept that I spoke about during the lecture portion of the workshop was about how in vogue coffee experimental processing is right now. And when I mean experimental processing, I'm talking a lot about the fruit maceration stuff that's going on, where you take in fermentation tanks and producers will add stuff like strawberries or peaches or banana, and they kind of do this bit of cross fermentation that happens both with the coffee, with the addition of the sugars from the fruit, and it kind of makes a more dynamic fermentation occur and naturally imparts whatever fruit flavor it is, right? I said this was in vogue because I've seen a lot of roasters jump on the trend of purchasing these coffees. I've seen consumers personally really excited to try these coffees. They are very out there, very wild, and as you would expect, very fruity. One thing that I brought up though that Dante was kind of discussing with me and prompted us to have this conversation more formally was that I said something that I sort of learned from the book, and let's talk about the book. It's called Cheap Coffee by Karl Weinhold. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. Is that experimental processing, is that producer-led? Like, is it the producers who are coming up with those ideas and really pushing for that? Or is it more market and consumer-led? Is more so, or the argument is that it's more so consumer-led. If that's the case, I think that makes logical sense from a producer standpoint. The thing about this kind of experimental processing is that it takes resources that could be utilized elsewhere for said producers. A lot of times it could be more beneficial for a farmer to do something else. That being said though, if it's in demand and the producers can make money from it and maybe hop on the bandwagon, so to speak, then they're going to do it and they're incentivized to do it. What were some of your thoughts, Dante, about just that general kind of in vogue processing that we're talking about, as well as like what your take on that is? What do you think we should do as consumers, and just some general thoughts as well?
On a consumer level, because most people are very like, especially if you're just getting into coffee, you want that note, whatever it is, whether it's like the strawberry note, or I want that blueberry taste. Hey, if someone's taking the blueberries from wherever they are and mixing it with your coffee, and if you're still getting the qualities of that fresh roast, but you still get the taste, then more likely the consumer is going to want that. So I understand the drive for it, but me personally, as someone that's been expecting those like different flavors from different coffee, I don't know, it gets played out after a while.
Yeah, and you kind of get fatigued from it. You know, I had a coffee, I haven't talked to you about this yet, but I had a coffee recently that was a koji fermentation, which if you haven't had a koji fermentation coffee, it's very similar to what they do with sake, where they take koji spores and spread it over it during the fermentation process. And the coffee was delicious, but it was not something that I wanted a lot of. It was like, you know, maybe a 15-gram brew of it, then all right, that's it. That's all I want. Because it's so in your face and extreme that it's not one of those kind of things that you want all the time, which I think is a lot to speak to perhaps the longevity and perhaps even sustainability of experimental processing. Because, okay, if consumers they want it, but they're not wanting it all the time, then it seems kind of like a lot of infrastructure and investment on a producer's side for it to just be something that is, you know, it's tasty, it's fun to try, it's fun to like see what different fruits can impart, but then it doesn't last very long.
Yeah. Well, to your point, that's why I kind of think it's more producer based, because it is a product that the consumer likes to have, but because it's always there, a consumer is probably going to least likely get it. They're going to buy it because if that's what they want. That's what they're going to get every time.
Sure.
Every time. But as the person that makes the product, the person's only going to get it if it's there. And me, I feel like if you just don't do it, then, you know, if you don't do it, then you're not gonna want it.
Right. Exactly. Yeah, and there is a lot of other things with a producer not maybe jumping on the bandwagon. A lot of the producers, something that we take for granted is our access to information and to technology. And, you know, we can jump on Instagram and see all the trends, right? We can go into our local cafes that are, you know, pushing envelopes and such and see what kind of exciting things are happening and they're trying and experimenting with. I would say that a large part of producers, and this is something I'm learning in this book, which I want to talk about here in just a second, is that farmers and producers don't often have access to that same sort of information subset. And that can be for a lot of reasons. So what do? They rely on intermediaries, importers, exporters, kind of on the ground floor individuals who are relaying this information to them if it's not something that the producers are like, you know, learning from fellow producers or they're learning from just kind of other cooperatives. So that kind of leads us to talk about this book. And the book is titled Cheap Coffee, Behind the Curtain of the Global Coffee Trade. It's by Karl Weinhold. And I can read a little bit about him on the back of the book here. I think it'll kind of say a bit about him if you don't know about it. It says that Karl Weinhold is a researcher, consultant, and operator of a post-colonial rural development, specifically the intersection between agrarian communities and the global economy, endeavoring to understand and undo extractive power structures in favor of equitable alternatives. His professional background is in management consulting, agriculture, and coffee trading. He is the founder of the Cedro Alto Coffee Farmers Collective, an organization that advocates for the empowerment of smallholder coffee farmers in Colombia, where he calls home. That's who Karl is, and I have yet to have a conversation with him. I know that other individuals within our city have had that privilege, one of them being Alexander Roach at Boycott, and I'm not sure if that's live anywhere. I'll have to check if it is, but I do know that this individual, Karl, he has a lot of knowledge, and that kind of stems from him being in the producing countries, right? You get to see a fresh perspective. I've never had the opportunity to even travel to one of these producing countries to kind of see, but he actually is not just there on an exploration journey. He actually is working there and doing his research there. And I think that speaks volumes to this work. So again, Cheap Coffee is the title of the book. And one section that I would love to kind of highlight that is related to this conversation is on page 78 of the book, and it's in section 2, which section 2 talks about the international value chain. And the subtitle for this part of the book is non-demand for mainstream quality. And here is a quote from the book. And it says, since most coffee consumers lack the sensory skills to recognize high quality coffee, they are therefore more likely to rely on external cues such as price, packaging, and advertising that may or may not reflect the intrinsic quality of the product. So this is something that I think is really related to a conversation we had on the podcast some months ago at this point when we were talking about the over-branding of products, right? And I think that the over-branding of products in tandem with weird, experimental, off-the-wall, non-traditional processing methods go hand in hand.
Yeah.
If you think a lot about the coffee roasters and the cafes, and this is no ill will towards them, but those are the ones who are oftentimes the ones who have that excellent branding, who are really on the forefront of our industry, are pushing these kind of coffees, right? I would say that, just the average smaller roasters, maybe who are roasting more what you could maybe define loosely as average coffees, are not pushing these crazy experimental coffees as much. On one hand, it's because those roasters, those cafes, they have the platform, and because they have the platform, they can, influence more people, and they can get other people on, again, like I keep saying, the bandwagon. And I've noticed that a lot, especially coffee, right? There's a lot of bandwagoning that happens. I mean, if we even think of how we define the waves of coffee, like in different sectors, we can think about bandwagoning. And it's like, what are the values that individuals who are highlighting and using their platforms that are good and we want to maintain? And then what are the things that are like these in-vogue kind of concepts that we should just maybe push to the side and say, this was cool for a minute, this was fun to try, but this is not equitable long term.
It's definitely something I've noticed. Paying attention to freshness and the quality is not something that makes the most money.
Right.
Which then in turns builds this kind of equity flow. So I do get that. After hearing that though, that is kind of some ignorance on my part to blame the producer for something that they're not knowledgeable about.
Right. Kind of based off of that, there's another quote here, and we're just going to be kind of pulling some different things in this book. And again, I've been working my way through this book very slowly because it is dense. I recommend you picking yourself out of the copy and going through it, especially if you're a coffee professional. I think there's a lot of things in here that are eye-opening that either we take for granted, we're completely ignorant to, or that we maybe just wouldn't be able to understand otherwise. On the international value chain, and so this is on page 87, and it's kind of coming off of a section talking about who's responsible for the quality of a value coffee and who should benefit from it. It says this: like any investment, the decision to produce specialty quality coffee has costs and potential benefits whose relationships must be evaluated. First, despite the best technical assistance available, nature and plants are unpredictable. There's no guarantee that measures put in place to improve quality will work, or that they will work enough to access prices that makes them worthwhile. Second, there is no price guarantee. So this is kind of another idea related to that experimental processing piece, where I could say that we could maybe argue that it is favorable for a producer to do that, because I haven't seen research on this, and if there's someone out there who knows more about this than I do, please send me more information, send us more information, because I'd be curious. But in a lot of ways, my previous argument on other podcast episodes was that experimental processing can be a way to almost save or salvage a coffee, and that seems really extreme when I say it that way. But think about a coffee that maybe scores a little bit lower or maybe just more average. And if you can add an extra step in the producing side of things with, adding fruit, something like that, to the fermentation process, then perhaps you would get a coffee that then tastes more dynamic and can score higher, can maybe sell for higher, with of course the added inputs that you're having to put to make it taste that way. I would say that would be a reason why it could be producer-led with those experimental processings. It could be favorable for the producer if it gives them enough added value, right?
Is that more to like save a coffee or get a specific taste of?
I guess you could say both. Save a coffee is probably extreme, and again, this is coming from my ignorance as someone who has not spent time, on a producing farm. But I think to get a specific taste is probably more apt to what is actually occurring when these kind of experimental processings are occurring. All right, so we're bouncing around a little bit, but I kind of want to roll back to something that I brought up at the beginning of this conversation, which was how sometimes farmers don't always have access to the same set of information that we do. And I think because of that, we often have different sort of ideas of luxury, of standards of living, of what is desirable and so forth. And this book speaks to that. So in one of the final sections of the book on sustainability, this is part 4, it talks about international coffee farmer migration. This is on page 133. It says this: migration is not often a family project, at least at first, but it can lead to a different kind of dependence. That is, the sense that one's livelihood is determined by faraway, disconnected others. That other becomes the provider, the successful one, whose generosity or ignorance allows us to prosper. That might be either a role model or represent a source of resentment, or a little bit of both. Let's go down a little bit further in this paragraph and talk about this section. This is what I really want us to focus on, Dante. That section says this: the worldwide spread of Western media disrupts traditional concepts of status and value, leading to rising expectations for personal development. So a lot of this talks about like domestic issues and how men will leave the farm in search of cash producing work to supplement the farm's earnings, and then some will return, but then often many never do. The kind of reality of this is that when we're talking about anything in coffee, when we're talking about experimental processing, when we're talking about how many millions of dollars that we put into cafe build-outs, into roasting facilities, and so forth, we have to understand that we have a westernized perspective of what its value, of what makes a product good, of what makes a coffee of value to us, both individually and culturally. We often kind of have this idea of, and there's a section in this book that uses the term producer porn. And I find that really interesting, and it actually uses the word poverty porn, to where we're so drawn and almost like sexualized, like, you know, or fantasized about the idea that like we're really helping this producer by purchasing their coffee. Yeah. And that's not all untrue, but I think when we, again, this is a perfect example of how a Western perspective can kind of, we put ourselves on this pedestal of like, this is luxury, this is value, and look at us supporting someone and raising someone up, and it's because of us that they can be successful. I think it's a dangerous kind of perspective to take. Really kind of go to your head. Ultimately, just diminishes the value that is there in those products that you're selecting. And you know, I don't think there's anything wrong with addressing that if you are supporting a farm or you're supporting something, it can be non-coffee related, that is of great need. That's a good thing, but doing so in a way that maybe calls others to action to do the same and is not in this kind of westernized perspective. So that's kind of getting a little bit more, you know, I guess philosophical and talking about morality and such. But I do think that it is related and important to highlight when we're thinking about producing countries, when we're talking about experimental processing methods, and what do we want to see from coffee. Hey, stop. Get down.
Yeah, the only thing I can really add is to like, well, one, I don't know how true it is that people are buying coffee for the only reason for them to help out a certain country.
Right.
I feel like that's a very like specialty coffee type thing that like you think
absolutely
buying this coffee helps out a specific region or whatever. But I think most people are just buying coffee like that are just unaware of like what the work that goes into certain things.
Yes, and it's important to remember too that specialty is such a fraction of the coffee market as a whole.
Yeah, just because something is limited to specialty coffee doesn't mean that that's like the main agenda that's being promoted. Because one reason I think that's why you get a lot of like product that's not that good is because you're just getting like a supplement of just like whatever doesn't sell, or something, or not whatever that doesn't sell. The stuff that just gets made because it sells.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. So like it's just because it's like maybe something that's in vogue or something that's like popularized, and that's the reason why. It's because it's, you know, coffee is very, specialty coffee is very on the nose of following trends.
Yeah, exactly.
And what is like sexy right now is what's going to sell the most, and what cafes are going to use the most, what roasters are going to use the most, and that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
This has been riddled with cat interruptions.
The cat's going wild, right?
The cat's going real wild.
Right. See, you would miss all this. People who are watching this on Spotify or listening to this on Spotify, you're missing all this, right?
Well, since the cat wants more attention, I think we're going to have to cut the show right now.
Yeah.
So...
I think we could talk more about this though.
Yeah.
Deliberately, because like, one, this conversation has opened my mind up to some more thoughts about like between both sides.
Yeah.
Especially towards the producer side. I probably didn't pay attention to until just now.
Yeah, there's a lot. That's what again, the book that we've been like really kind of focused talking about is Cheap Coffee, Karl Weinhold.
Yeah.
Recommend you get that. There'll be a link to somewhere where you can purchase this. I think it's a great work. It's very important. Karl Weinhold.
Karl Weinhold.
The real one. Karl, if you're watching this, we appreciate you. And thank you so much for, if you're watching this on YouTube, watching this, and if you're just listening to this on the podcast feed, thank you so much. As always, we recommend you going through our Patreon. It's a great way to support us kind of ongoingly. We've got lots of fun things coming up. Mm-hmm. We're going to be doing some fresh merch that's going to be out soon. We have a little video on that, so be sure to subscribe to the YouTube channel if you want more access to videos and for us to keep doing the thing. So
if you want more cat videos, go to the Patreon.
Yeah, it's gonna be all the cat outtakes of us getting on to the cat for doing cat things.
Yeah.
So thanks, Dante, and thank you, listener. We'll see you next time.